A struggling law student, drowning in debt, finds himself at the center of a jaw-dropping twist when a mysterious, wealthy widow proposes a deal that could change his life forever. 7 days after the shocking agreement, his world begins to unravel in ways he never imagined. The gray sky blanketed the small college town in Texas, casting a somber mood over its rain-slicked streets. Mark Davis, a 23-year-old law student, trudged along the damp sidewalk, his face clouded with worry. Balancing the pressures of his final year, a demanding part-time job, and the crushing weight of his late father's debts, Mark felt the world closing in on him with every passing moment. His phone vibrated suddenly, jolting him from his spiraling thoughts. "Mark Davis speaking," he answered, trying to mask the exhaustion in his voice. The composed yet commanding voice on the other end cut through the air like a blade. "Mr. Davis, this is Eleanor Brooks. I need to meet with you. It's regarding your financial situation." Mark frowned, confusion overtaking him. "I'm sorry, who are you, and how do you even know?" "I know enough," she interrupted with chilling precision. "Meet me at Brooks Bistro tonight at 7 p.m. It's important." Before Mark could object, the call disconnected, leaving him bewildered yet intrigued. Who was this Eleanor Brooks, and how did she know about his struggles? Despite his reservations, curiosity pulled him toward the upscale cafe. As the rain poured harder, Mark stepped into the warm haven of Brooks Bistro. The inviting aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, contrasting with the tension building inside him. At a corner table sat Eleanor Brooks, a striking figure of elegance and power. Her silver hair was styled with perfection, and her tailored suit radiated wealth and authority. "Mark," she said, her voice calm yet commanding, as she gestured for him to sit across from her. Mark hesitated, but eventually sank into the chair. "Mrs. Brooks, I don't understand. What's this about?" She met his gaze, her piercing blue eyes steady. "Straight to the point." "Good," she remarked, taking a delicate sip of tea. "I know about your debts, the ones your father left behind. I know you're barely getting by, and I'm here to offer you a solution." Mark's brow furrowed in suspicion. And what kind of solution would that be? She set her cup down with precision, her words deliberate. "Marry me." The room seemed to pause as the weight of her words sunk in. Mark blinked, sure he had misheard. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Eleanor said, her voice unwavering. "This isn't about love. It's a business arrangement. I'll pay off all your debts, secure your financial future, and in return, you'll be my husband." Mark let out a disbelieving laugh, his disbelief palpable. "You're serious? Why me? You don't even know who I am." Eleanor leaned forward, her tone steady but firm. "Exactly. You're young, unattached, and desperate enough to consider this. I don't need romance, Mark. I need a companion, a partner in name only. Think of this as a contract, nothing more." Mark shook his head, his thoughts racing. "This is insane. What's in it for you?" For the first time, her expression softened, revealing a glimpse of vulnerability. "I've spent my life alone, Mark. No children, no family left. I want companionship, even if it's just for appearances. I also need someone to help me secure my legacy. A husband will solidify that." Mark pushed his chair back abruptly, the legs scraping against the polished floor. I can't. I need time to think this over." "Of course," she replied coolly, her composure unshaken. "But don't take too long. My offer won't last forever." Mark walked home in a daze, the rain soaking through his clothes as his mind swirled with Eleanor's shocking proposal. That night he sat at the kitchen table with his mother, her pale face a painful reminder of the medical treatments that had drained their already meager finances. The weight of his younger sister's looming tuition fees hung over him like a storm cloud. When he explained Eleanor's proposition, his mother's expression turned somber. Mark, she began softly, her voice trembling, I know it sounds unimaginable, but if she's willing to help, maybe it's worth considering. Mark clenched his fists, his pride battling his desperation. You're asking me to marry a woman I don't love just to solve our problems? His mother reached across the table, her frail hand grasping his. I'm asking you to save yourself, she said, her voice thick with emotion. To save us. The following morning, Mark returned to the bistro. Eleanor was already there, poised and unreadable, her demeanor as calm as a still pond. She barely glanced up from her tablet as he approached. You've decided? She asked without preamble, her tone as crisp as her tailored suit. Mark took a deep breath, his heart pounding. I'll do it. A faint smile played on her lips as she set the tablet aside. Good. The arrangements will be made immediately. A week later, Mark stood in a small courthouse, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a physical force. The suit Eleanor had provided fit perfectly, but it felt foreign, like armor for a battle he wasn't sure he could win. The ceremony was quiet, witnessed only by Eleanor's lawyer and a notary. As they exchanged vows, Mark's unease grew with every word. When the officiant finally pronounced them husband and wife, Eleanor turned to him with a smile that seemed more like a mask than a genuine expression of joy. Welcome to your new life, Mr. Davis, she said, her voice as smooth as silk. As they left the courthouse, the rain began to drizzle again, a fitting backdrop to Mark's inner turmoil. He glanced down at his reflection in a puddle, his face pale and uncertain. Had he just saved his family, or sold his soul? The gates to Eleanor Brooks's sprawling estate creaked open as Mark's cab rolled up the long, winding driveway. The mansion loomed ahead, its towering columns and pristine stone facade exuding an air of old money and grandeur. Yet, despite its opulence, the darkened windows gave it an eerie, lifeless feel. Mark stepped out, suitcase in hand, feeling like a trespasser in a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Eleanor greeted him in the grand foyer, her polished demeanor unshaken. Welcome, Mr. Davis, she said, her formal tone sending a shiver down his spine. I trust you'll find everything to your satisfaction. Dinner is at 7. Mark nodded wordlessly, following a housekeeper who led him to his room. The space was as luxurious as he'd expected. A king-sized bed, antique furnishings, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking meticulously manicured gardens. But the room felt cold and impersonal, as if untouched by human warmth. That evening, Mark found himself seated stiffly at a dining table so long it could have accommodated 20 guests. Eleanor sat at the opposite end, dressed impeccably in a silk blouse and pearls, her every movement radiating control. The food, prepared by a chef he hadn't seen, was lavish, an extravagant reminder of her wealth. I trust you're settling in, Eleanor asked, slicing into her filet mignon with surgical precision. It's different, Mark replied cautiously. This place is so huge, I feel like I'm going to get lost, Eleanor smirked, her tone dry. You'll get used to it. Or you won't. Either way, you're here now. Mark bristled at her bluntness. You didn't mention much about your late husband before. Her knife paused mid-cut. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin, her tone darkening. He was a businessman like your father. Their paths crossed once or twice. Mark leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. What do you mean? She looked at him, her piercing eyes sharp as daggers. Let's just say unfinished business has a way of lingering. Picking up her glass of wine, she added cryptically, but that's in the past. Soon enough, you'll understand why I chose you. Her words sent a chill down Mark's spine. That night, as he wandered the mansion's silent halls, he passed several locked doors, their brass handles gleaming in the dim light. Each one seemed to whisper secrets he wasn't sure he wanted to uncover. As the days passed, Mark's unease deepened. The mansion's grandeur began to feel more like a prison than a home. The staff avoided his gaze, speaking in hushed tones whenever he approached. He overheard snippets of conversations that made his stomach twist. Why him? Does he even know? She never does anything without a reason. He'll figure it out eventually. They always do. One evening, unable to shake his growing suspicion, Mark found himself pacing the library. His eyes fell on Eleanor's desk, its surface cluttered with papers and an ornate key that gleamed under the lamp's soft glow. Intrigued, Mark glanced around the room. Finding it empty, he hesitated for only a moment before picking up the key. It was heavier than he'd expected, its intricate design cold to the touch. Could this unlock one of the doors he'd seen? The thought made his pulse quicken. Sliding the key into his pocket, Mark quietly left the room, his heart pounding. That night, as the mansion lay shrouded in stillness, Mark crept down the hall. The key felt like a lead weight in his pocket. He stopped in front of one of the locked doors, its handle gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Casting a quick glance over his shoulder, he inserted the key and turned it. The soft click of the lock reverberated through the silent corridor, sending a shiver down his spine. Slowly, Mark pushed the door open, revealing a room frozen in time. Dusty furniture and faded wallpaper surrounded him. On a small table, tarnished silver frames held photographs of Eleanor's younger days, one of her and her late husband, another of a couple Mark didn't recognize. But it was the stack of papers on the desk that caught his attention. Mark rifled through them, his breath hitching as he recognized his father's name in several of the documents. The records detailed failed business deals between Eleanor's husband and Mark's father, revealing a history of betrayal and deceit. One letter, written in sharp, slanted handwriting, made his stomach churn. "You ruined everything. My family was left with nothing because of your lies." Mark's heart raced as he flipped to the last page, a marriage license. His name and Eleanor's were printed boldly, the date weeks earlier than their actual wedding. She had planned this long before he'd even met her. On the desk lay an old leather-bound diary. Hands trembling, Mark opened it. The entries, written in Eleanor's hand, revealed a calculated plan to use Mark as a pawn in her quest for vengeance. "I will take everything from him, just as his father took everything from me." A floorboard creaked behind him, making Mark whirl around in alarm. Standing in the doorway, Eleanor's silhouette loomed against the faint glow from the hallway. Her voice was icy, cutting through the shadows. "Enjoying yourself?" Mark stammered, the diary still clutched in his hands. "Eleanor, I didn't mean—" "You thought you'd find answers here?" she interrupted, stepping into the room with measured precision. "Curiosity can be dangerous, Mark. What do you think you're doing?" Summoning his courage, Mark straightened. "Why did you really marry me? Is this about my father? Are you trying to get revenge?" Eleanor's expression hardened, the composed facade cracking slightly. "It's not your place to ask questions. Just do what you're told, and you'll leave this marriage better off than you started. Isn't that enough for you?" Mark's fists clenched, anger bubbling to the surface. "Enough! You've lied to me, manipulated me. This isn't a marriage, it's a trap." Eleanor's lips curved into a faint smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "A trap? Maybe you should have thought twice before signing those papers. You may think you're smart, Mark, but you're just like your father, blind to the damage you cause until it's too late." Mark glared at her, his voice rising. "If you hated him so much, why take it out on me? I had nothing to do with what he did to your family." For a moment, Eleanor's steely composure faltered. She stared at him, her gaze softening ever so slightly. "And my family deserved to lose everything? My husband deserved to die of stress and heartbreak while your father lived comfortably?" Her voice trembled, but only slightly. "Don't talk to me about fairness. Mark's voice dropped, his anger tempered by the weight of her words. Revenge won't bring him back, Eleanor. It won't undo what happened. You've spent your life consumed by this, hurting innocent people, ruining lives. When does it end? Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her resolve hardening once more. This conversation is over. Stay out of matters that don't concern you, Mark. With that, she turned and left the room, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Later that night, Mark lay wide awake in his luxurious yet suffocating room. Eleanor's words echoed in his mind, intertwining with the damning revelations he had uncovered. The diary, the letters, and the cryptic warnings from the staff painted a picture far darker than he had ever anticipated. Why had she gone to such lengths? Was it really just about revenge? His thoughts were interrupted by the faint murmur of Eleanor's voice coming from her study. Slipping out of bed, Mark crept silently down the dimly lit hallway, his heart pounding. Pressing his ear against the heavy wooden door, he caught fragments of her conversation. "Make sure the transfer is complete," Eleanor said, her tone sharp and commanding. "We can't afford any delays. He must not back out now. Time is running out." Mark's blood ran cold. What transfer? What did she mean by time is running out? Whatever was happening, he was in far deeper than he'd imagined. The next day, Mark sat alone in the grand library, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The once imposing estate now felt like a gilded prison. Determined to find clarity, he approached Mr. Harris, the head butler, who had always maintained a reserved yet knowing demeanor. "Mr. Harris," Mark began hesitantly, "I need your help. Something isn't right here, and I think you know what I'm talking about." The older man regarded him with a calm yet unreadable expression. "I was wondering when you'd come to me." Mr. Davis Mark's chest tightened. "You know something, don't you? About Eleanor? About all of this?" Mr. Harris sighed deeply, his hands clasped behind his back. "You're not the first young man to be caught in Eleanor's web, Mr. Davis. She is determined, ruthless even when it comes to achieving her goals. My advice? Be cautious. Watch your back." Mark's breath hitched. "Why are you still here, then? If you know what she's capable of?" A flicker of regret crossed the butler's face. "Some of us don't have the luxury of walking away." With those cryptic words ringing in his ears, Mark resolved to act. That evening, he reached out to Peter, his trusted friend from law school, under the guise of seeking advice for a class project. "Peter," Mark began, his tone casual yet purposeful, "if someone signed a contract under coercion or false pretenses, is there a way to nullify it?" Peter raised an eyebrow. "Hypothetically, yes, but it depends on the evidence." "Why? Are you in some kind of trouble?" Mark forced a laugh, brushing off the question. "No, just working on a hypothetical case study. Thanks for the insight, though." Over the next few days, Mark searched Eleanor's office whenever she was away, carefully piecing together the evidence he needed. Late one night, his persistence paid off when he discovered a sealed envelope addressed to his father. The letter was filled with venom, written in Eleanor's sharp, slanted handwriting. "You left us with nothing. My husband's heart couldn't bear the stress, and now he's gone because of you. I will see to it that your family pays for what you've done." Mark's hands trembled as he returned the letter to its hiding place. Eleanor's actions weren't just about reclaiming her fortune. They were fueled by years of anger and pain. Returning to his room, Mark began mapping out possible escape routes from the estate. But Eleanor's sharp instincts caught on to his unease. The next morning, she found him in the breakfast room, her icy presence cutting through the quiet like a knife. "You've been busy," she remarked, her tone calm yet loaded with menace. Mark froze, his spoon halfway to his mouth. "I don't know what you're talking about." Eleanor smirked, her piercing gaze locking onto his. Don't play coy with me, Mark. If you think you can outsmart me, you're sorely mistaken. I've dealt with far more formidable opponents than you. Mark swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. I'm not doing anything wrong. Leaning closer, Eleanor's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. If you betray me, you'll wish you hadn't. Remember that. Straightening, she exited the room, her heels clicking ominously against the marble floor. Mark sat frozen, the realization dawning that escape might be even more dangerous than staying. But staying meant surrendering to her twisted plans, and that was a fate he refused to accept. The air in the estate felt charged as Mark paced the library, the weight of his discoveries pressing down on him. He had reached out to a private investigator days before, and now he anxiously awaited their findings. When the call finally came, the truth hit him like a thunderbolt. Eleanor's late husband, Harold Brooks, had been swindled by Mark's father in a fraudulent real estate deal. The scam had left the Brooks family in financial ruin, and Harold's subsequent death from a heart attack was the devastating final blow. Eleanor's bitterness wasn't just justified, it had consumed her entirely. Mark clenched his fists, anger and guilt warring within him. How could she blame me for my father's sins? Yet, as much as he resented her, he couldn't ignore the pain that had driven her to such extremes. That evening, Mark met Peter in secret. With Peter's help, he compiled the evidence he had gathered from Eleanor's office and the investigators' findings. Among the damning documents, they uncovered current business dealings Eleanor was involved in, shady partnerships, falsified reports, and borderline illegal activities designed to rebuild her wealth at any cost. Mark, Peter said, grimly scanning the evidence, this is more than enough to take her down. But you need to be careful. If she realizes you're on to her, there's no telling what she might do. Mark nodded, his jaw set with determination. She's already done enough damage. It's time to end this. The next morning, Mark waited in the grand sitting room, his heart pounding as he prepared to confront Eleanor. When she finally entered, her icy composure remained intact, but her sharp gaze betrayed suspicion. Mark stood, holding a folder of documents. We need to talk. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, her tone clipped. Is that so? What could possibly be so urgent? Mark's voice was firm as he held up the folder. I know everything about my father, Harold, and what you've been doing to rebuild your fortune. For the first time, Eleanor's mask faltered. Her eyes flicked to the folder, then back to Mark. You've been snooping again, haven't you? She said, her tone cold. Do you even understand what your father did to my family? Mark stepped closer, his voice rising. I understand that he wronged you. But what about the people you've hurt along the way? What about me? I didn't do anything to deserve this. Eleanor's jaw tightened, her steely resolve cracking. And my family deserved to lose everything? My husband deserved to die of heartbreak while your father lived comfortably. Don't talk to me about fairness, Mark. Mark's hands shook as he held up the documents. Revenge won't bring him back, Eleanor. It won't undo what happened. You've spent your life consumed by this, hurting innocent people, ruining lives. When does it end? For a moment, Eleanor's expression softened, her icy demeanor giving way to something almost vulnerable. You remind me of him, you know, Harold, that same fire, that same stubbornness. I didn't expect to feel anything for you, Mark, but here we are. Mark hesitated, taken aback by her words. If you really feel that way, then stop this. Let it go before it's too late. Before Eleanor could respond, the sound of car tires crunching on gravel echoed through the estate. Moments later, uniformed police officers entered the room, followed by Peter. An officer stepped forward. Eleanor Brooks, we have a warrant for your arrest. You're being charged with multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. Eleanor's eyes darkened as she turned to Mark. You called them? Mark met her gaze, his voice steady. You left me no choice. As the officers led Eleanor away, she glanced back at him one last time. Her voice was calm, almost haunting. "You may think you've won, Mark, but revenge isn't so easily undone. Be careful it doesn't consume you, too." Mark stood in the now empty room, a mixture of relief and sadness washing over him. He had exposed the truth and protected himself, but Eleanor's parting words lingered in his mind. Was she right? Would the shadow of their shared past ever truly fade? The gavel's sharp bang echoed through the courtroom, signaling the end of Eleanor Brooks's trial. Mark sat quietly in the back row, watching as the once commanding woman he had married faced her fate. Despite her ruthless actions, his testimony had helped reduce her sentence. Mark hadn't done it out of sympathy, but out of an understanding of the pain and loss that had consumed her life. As the judge adjourned the court, Eleanor briefly turned her head. For the first time, her gaze held neither malice nor defiance. Instead, there was a faint nod, an almost imperceptible acknowledgement that Mark couldn't quite place. Days later, Mark was summoned to the estate one final time. The once intimidating mansion now felt hollow, stripped of the power and mystery that Eleanor had wielded within its walls. Mark was greeted by the estate lawyer, who handed him a neatly sealed envelope. The letter inside, written in Eleanor's elegant handwriting, was addressed to him. "Mark, it was never about the money. It was about closure. Harold deserved justice, but I lost sight of what truly mattered. You reminded me that revenge is its own prison. I don't want this estate to stand as a monument to my pain any longer. It can be something better. Use it well. Eleanor." Mark exhaled deeply, the weight of the letter settling in. He decided to sell the estate, a decision that came easily. Its grandeur, while impressive, had been a cage for both him and Eleanor. The sale's proceeds allowed him to pay off his family's debts, freeing them from the shadow of his father's mistakes. But Mark didn't stop there. Using the remaining funds, he established a scholarship in Harold Brooks's name, a fund dedicated to helping students from disadvantaged backgrounds achieve their dreams. It felt like the only way to honor the man who had unknowingly become a casualty of a feud between two families. Mark's return to law school felt like a new beginning. This time he was more determined than ever to use his education for good. He interned at a legal aid center, working tirelessly to help individuals who had been wronged and left without recourse, just as Eleanor had been all those years ago. One crisp autumn afternoon, Mark received a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Sitting on a park bench near campus, he unfolded the paper with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Mark, I've had much time to reflect. For years I believed that revenge would heal the wounds Harold's death left behind. But I see now that it was never the answer. It only deepened the pain. Your kindness, even when faced with my betrayal, showed me something I had long forgotten. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is strength. Thank you for being better than the world around you. Thank you for showing me that we can break the cycles we inherit. I hope you find the happiness I never could. Eleanor." Mark sat with the letter for a long time, letting her words sink in. Carefully folding it, he tucked it into his jacket pocket, feeling an odd sense of peace. A year later, Mark stood in front of a group of scholarship recipients at a modest ceremony. Behind him hung a simple plaque, the Harold Brooks Scholarship Fund for Second Chances. Mark addressed the audience, his voice steady and full of conviction. "This fund isn't just about providing financial support. It's about creating opportunities for those who might otherwise be forgotten. It's about turning pain into purpose." After the ceremony, Mark sat alone for a moment, reflecting on the whirlwind of the past year. His path had been irrevocably altered, yet he finally felt as though he was heading in the right direction. Walking away from the event, Mark glanced up at the clear sky. The weight of the past had finally lifted, leaving behind a quiet reminder of the lessons he had learned about justice, forgiveness, and the power to transform pain into hope. Eleanor's letter remained tucked in his pocket, a lasting testament to the choices they both had made. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and hit the like button. Comment your favorite part in the video.